Today, we're diving deep into a conversation that so many of us were never taught how to have. One about sexuality, shame, and the stories we've inherited about our bodies.
Our guest, Dr. Tina Schermer Sellers, is a licensed psychotherapist, best-selling author, researcher, and speaker who's spent decades helping people heal from religious and cultural sexual shame, reconnect with intimacy, and reclaim pleasure as a pathway to wholeness.
Through her groundbreaking work, including her books, Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, and Shameless Parenting, Dr. Tina has guided thousands in unlearning deep-rooted shame that disconnects us from our bodies, relationships, and sense of self.
We'll explore how trauma, conditioning, and even purity culture shape our relationship to intimacy, and how, when we learn to release shame, we don't just heal our sexuality, we heal our nervous system, our relationships, and the way we show up in life.
Welcome, Tina. It's amazing to have you on the podcast today. Like I said before we hit record, I'm so excited about this conversation, not only because of what you specialize in, but also the psychedelic element to it, because that's kind of like my realm, which I love. So got some questions for you, hard-hitting questions for you in that space. But do you just want to tell our audience a little bit more about you, what you specialize in, any projects that you're currently working on, and then we can dive straight in?
Okay. Well, I've been on this earth for a bit now, and what that usually means for me is that I accumulate skills and experiences and things, and they take me places. I spent 30 years as a professor in a graduate marriage and family therapy program, also clinical faculty in family medicine at the University of Washington as well. And part of what I was doing there was what's called medical family therapy. So it looks at the impact of illness on people's lives, but also how people's lives affect their health and wellness as well. So it involved a lot of teaching of physicians about patients and teaching therapists how to be co-located in family practice clinics to work alongside with and provide integrated care, that kind of thing. But also during that time, I was teaching the only graduate level human sexuality class for people who were becoming therapists at our university. It's one course is required for licensure at the state that I was teaching in. And so I was the one that taught that class. And one of the things I came to learn that was surprising to me, which is just going to tell you more about me and my naivete, was how American lack of sex education. Since 1980, it's been abstinence-only education, which we know is 80% medically inaccurate, fear-based, and religious. Okay, the government was paying for it, but it was really what happened in 1980 politically and sociopolitically in the United States, that there was a merging of church and state, and the religious right started to grow as a front to growing capitalism and corporations in the US. That's been going on. And so that was really affecting what people were learning. And what they were basically learning was consumer culture was teaching them that they're not good enough and nothing is right about them, and therefore they should keep buying things. But then what they were getting in their schools and faith communities, for those that were involved in that, was that their sexual desires, their sexual action, their sexual wants and thoughts could ruin their future. And there were all kinds of stories about that. Well, this began to bubble up for me around the year 2000, because I was hitting the first wave of grad students that had gone through their adolescence in the 90s, which is really when things started to happen here. And that took me in its own direction. I became incredibly burdened and curious about what had happened, what were the experiences that had gotten people to this place in their adult life where they were disgusted by their bodies. They didn't think they were worth desiring. They didn't think that pleasure was a safe or good thing to have, or even a healing thing to have. And it was coming out in how they were talking about themselves and their story. When in the program that I was teaching in, we believed that therapists were only ever as good as they knew where they began and ended, like what their stories were, so they could separate it from the person they were sitting with and they weren't getting them mixed up, right? And so it was common throughout our program that whatever the subject was we were teaching, gender, family systems, whatever, we were going to also ask them to reflect on that aspect of their own lives. So by the time they got to the human sexuality class, they knew one of the assignments was I was going to ask them to commit their sexual autobiography to paper. And people were like, oh, and I'd be like, the thing is, in America, you don't have a narrative in your head, likely. You have experiences. Like, I remember getting in trouble when I was 5. And I remember my first kiss. And I remember feeling this and not feeling okay about it. Like, but you're not going to have a narrative with an arc. So I'm going to give you like 60, 70 questions, not to answer every one, but I want you to look at the arc of the questions. And then I want you to write your story. I have read well over 600 of these in my career. And I would say to them, I know you think your story is special because it's special to you, and it is. But when you're someone like me who's reading, 35 of these a year, I have very few stories in my head that fall outside the range of common. So I'm not going to remember your story. I'm going to write on it as a loving person who cares about you. I'm going to write in the margin as if I'm talking to you. So I'm going to say, oh, baby, you're little. And that was so normal. Like, I'm going to say those kinds of things because I want you to have the experience of being seen and being loved and valued in your story so that you at least have something to contrast from what you likely experience. Now, there always could be a couple people who grew up in a sex positive, sexually informed home, but I found that was less than 5% in all my years and in talking across the US and whatever. So anyway, that got me into doing research, like what happened in the US to cause this, because it wasn't that way for me. I had to look at me a little bit more too. Like, well, what was common for me? Well, I grew up in a Swedish immigrant home, and we had epigenetics, generations of sexually informed and sexually positive people, grandmas, grandpas, great aunts, great uncles, like I could talk to, and it was talked about a lot growing up. And so I thought that was common. I've learned that I was the one that came from the weird family. That was not common in America. It's common in Sweden. It's not common in America. And so I did a lot more like asking people questions. Tell me what was going on how did you learn about sexuality? What was going on in your family? What was going on in your community? And that's really where I learned and began to really do research as to what had been happening sociopolitically in the US to really shift the attitude. It was mostly when I was growing up, as far as around me, there were just things you didn't talk about. But it didn't have this overwhelming shame feeling to it. It was just, it wasn't polite to talk about it, kind of. I was more that. But then there was this overt shaming that was happening from both capitalism, like how we were selling things, how we were marketing things, as well as in the schools, even the public schools, right? And so that led me into writing my first book, which was Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy, where I told the story of how this happened and the role that capitalism was playing in it, and how we weren't meant to be sex negative. Like that, there was stuff thousands of years old, even on the Abrahamic line, that was very sex positive, that was never brought forward in the formation of what became the wider Christian church around the US of the world, really. And so I wanted them to know that. And then I wanted them to have ideas about how to heal, which I had been working on models while I was doing my clinical work, because I always had a practice, So I put that in there. And then I put like how to develop practices in your life that are pleasure-based, filled with being valued and valuing another. And that can feel deeply meaningful to you, however you make sense of that. And how that can be different than exploitation, which was something that was very common in the US. People experience their sexuality so much as an act of exploitation or transaction, right? And didn't have a lot of kind of heart and soul connection. I had some pleasure, but didn't have a lot of connection to it. So that was the first book that I wrote, and really that shifted in many ways the focus of my career, even though I was still doing some of these other things. But as far as like speaking around the world and stuff, it was really on how does sexual shame form? What are the systems that support it? How do we free ourselves from it? How do we deconstruct some of the information that we got and all of that? And the second book that I wrote, Shameless Parenting and Everything You Need to Raise Shame-Free, Confident Kids and Heal Your Shame Too, that came about because I was hearing from so many people who had read the first book that said, that was me. This has been so helpful. I can really see how this happened for me. Now I have children in my life. I don't want to do to them what was done to me, but I don't know what to do. And I said, I've been teaching this to physicians and therapists forever. Let me put together a book that's super practical and really easy to work with, right? And so I put together a book that was basically each chapter is birth to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, all the way up to 18. It says, here's the behavioral tasks. Most of the time, people are trying to accomplish the emotional, the behavioral tasks. Here's what they're needing affirmation, right? And to see in you. And then I put in some of their sexual curiosities or body curiosities that are going to emerge at that age and phase. And then I invite the reader to think about how might that be for me when my kids find their genitals or walk in on it or whatever. And if you can feel that part of you that goes, just put your loving hand on your heart and say, I had people who loved me very much who didn't know how to give me what I needed. And that right there, that feeling, that's just shame. And it's left over from that. And I want to heal that part of me too. And so I give some hints of what they can do to heal themselves. And really, it's a lot of doing exactly what you're going to do for a kid. You're going to do it for yourself first. And at the end of every little chapter, and this is like a workbook, at the end of every chapter, it's like, here are the leading books for kids or adolescents, whatever the age is. Here's the leading books for parents. And here's the leading website. You can go get these things free at the library, I literally walk people through healing themselves and then taking their kid through and designing a whole new legacy for the child's experience. So that when you watch them when they're an adult, if they have children in their life, you're going to see that they don't do that. They kind of like, oh, this is fun. Here we go. They see it much more as a potentially connecting and joy-filled thing that you get to deal with and helping them understand, yeah, that's your penis. It's a great part of you. And we take care of it like we take care of all of us. And, so I give a lot of that kind of stuff in there. And what was interesting about that book, and it largely came because of that, prior to that, I had been working with so many physicians who were like, I don't have time to also be a sex educator. But I have lots of people who don't know what to do. And it frustrates me because I don't feel like I can give them what they need. And I'm like, I will give you handouts, literal handouts that are front, back, side, here's the age. And it will give all the stuff that's in the book. And so I had an artist design those after I put the information together. So I had it, and I was passing those around to a bunch of sex educators and sex therapists in the States, just saying, hey, did you see that I missed anything? Is there a blind spot anywhere, And they were like, this will make a really good book. And then it started to be like, it's connecting the dots going, oh, yes, people are saying they want something in their hand that's a book they can pull off. And so then I'll often say to parents, just be 2 years ahead of your kid. You don't have to have the whole thing figured out. Take care of yourself first, move yourself through, and then just be 2 years ahead of your kid so that you're ready. When they move into that phase, you're ready with the staff and you're ready. You've already been imagining the things that could happen. and how you'll want to deal with it. Really more the way you would have wished somebody would have dealt with it with you know. And that's what took me into this space and so much work and research. Along that route, I found out, all right, I started to really feel like the profound impact of an abstinence only and shame based environment on people. So people would come in as adults, and the combination of what they were getting from a capitalist culture like ours that sells you're not good enough all the time, so you buy more, right? Does not provide child development information any longer. We did that through the 60s and 70s, but really we started taking it off the popular shelves, And as people were doing that and then taking what they had gotten, like the pornography, for a lot of people has been their main source of sex education, which, I mean, we could have a whole nother conversation about porn is not porn, but there is a lot of capitalism in how porn is and a lot of patriarchy in how porn is. And so it particularly disrupts straight couples. Gay couples are looking at their porn and they're seeing some diversity that matches with the diversity they can experience out there. And it's often less exploitive than straight porn is. Straight porn tends to have power over the dynamics in it. And it's confusing if that's the only sex education kind of you're getting. People were bringing that into their relationship and then wondering why their relationships were so hard. And I just kept seeing, and this was true for lots of therapists, we were seeing the same patterns over and over, but this huge dearth of information, right? So I began to think, man, this is complex trauma for sure. It is really hard to heal from. People have to put a lot of effort into it. And that's really what got me into doing learning psychedelics, because I wanted to see, are there ways to streamline this healing process so people are liberated to be able to live the life they want to live without all of these like barriers in the way that are like trigger, everywhere they go. And so that took me kind of to where I am more now. I run an organization for people who've studied, physicians and therapists who've studied psychedelics and are trying to figure out how in our current culture here in the US to do this work, because they have huge hearts that want to help people heal and have felt frustrated with what they've had to offer up to this point. It's not being impactful enough. And so when I went through and was learning, I thought that's one of the things I do really well is support professionals. So I'm going to build an organization to support those people who share these set of values, patient-centered values and ethics and whatnot, and are in all these different states in the US, some of which you can't even say the word in the grocery store, psychedelics in the grocery store. Mm-hmm. I live in Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest of the US, and it's one of 3 states with the highest legality of things being legal. Psilocybin is legal in Oregon, Colorado, and recently in New Mexico. So we got a long way to go. But when you have seen the research and you've seen people do what feels almost like miraculous healing in front of you, for people like me and other clinicians like me, it is so compelling, because to watch people feel free and then actually take steps to live the life they want, but felt too afraid to or whatever, it's like, next to my kids, it's probably my greatest joy.
But they've started to use ketamine as well, haven't they, alongside psilocybin?
Yeah, ketamine's federally legal. So it's legal in all states.
Oh, nice.
Okay. And the states are taking up the issue of things like psilocybin. They're even looking at like iboga, other kinds. One state's looking at iboga, But then when a state passes their laws and they develop their regulations for their state, for people that live within their state, it's still federally illegal. It hasn't happened that I know of, but parallel to that is places that do needle exchanges, and they made that legal to protect people who feel really caught in that world. They will open up a needle exchange where they've got support and nurses and doctors there to help people be safe. They've had raids on those places, federal raids on those places to close them down, even though in the state it's legal. So that's still a risk. So when you hear that places are legal, it's still a bit of a risk, although I haven't heard it happening anywhere. But we have a very corrupt and incompetent administration.
Rewinding a little bit on the taboo factor of it, obviously you growing up in a culture where it wasn't awkward or it wasn't shameful or anything like, what did you find in your research? What was the sticking point in the States as to why it was cultivated into this shameful conversation, kind of like taboo topic?
That's a great question, and we can answer it from lots of different places. We can go all the way back to the 4th century, where the men were vying to be placed as leaders in this brand new church that the emperor had decided was going to be their religion. And they were all fighting for being in charge. And they were fighting by denying the body and who could deny the body the most. That's what was happening in the 4th century when Christianity became an empire religion and not just a religion of some people that were walking around, living around together. When they couldn't do that, like there's all kinds of writing on this, and I go over this in the book too. But when they couldn't do it, when the men couldn't deny the body or didn't deny the body, you know what they did? Blamed women, right? You were to this, you were to that. So there you see patriarchy was long in place, right? It was in place in Judaism. It was long in place in many places around the world. And so when the establishment of the Christian church started, the same thing. So this sexual ethic has always been, there's a separation of body from spirit. Spirit is good, body is bad, and women are the tempters. So you can hit this in many times in history. The Puritans, for example, the witch burning. Women burning, that all happened. Yeah, that's been going on. But so I almost think sometimes it's helpful to just, to ask the question, who is that way of thinking serving and who isn't it serving? Well, clearly it's not serving women, children, or families, right? But it is serving men and powerful men. And the more that they can keep women down and children down, curate a hierarchy, then they get to make decisions, and there's not much accountability to those decisions that they're making. The effect of their decisions on women, children, or whatever, on the community. So there has been an investment in patriarchy, continuing to privilege one kind of person. In the US, it's a white male, a landowning white male, usually. And that, our whole entire constitution, everything is set up with that. And so it went on to serve capitalism. It serves the system for people in power to keep the power and to keep anybody underneath them that doesn't have the power, keep them ignorant and oppressed because they're easier to manipulate. So I don't know if it helps to give such a broad, but really, honestly, when you start studying this, you're like, oh, there, what was happening there? It was like, so who was it serving and who wasn't it serving and why? Then you get back to, it was serving the powerful and the wealthy and their desires, what they wanted for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Because fast forward to now, many of our listeners who have chronic illness or gut-related conditions, like a lot of the time they tie it back to trauma, or they've been in an abusive relationship, or they've had a tough childhood. Figuring out what that unresolved shame and trauma plays in how the body kind of holds on to expressive illness is really interesting if it's tied back generations,
Are you guys familiar with the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experience study? Yeah, it's fascinating to just look at, just even briefly, and you can easily do a search and find it. There are, I think it's like 10 different experiences. If you have 3 or 4 or more of those experiences, you have an increased likelihood to a whole host of physical illnesses, ailments, etc. And it affects morbidity and mortality. So it's very real. When we're working with people, we're like, yeah, your lovely, sweet, brilliant body held all of this pain it didn't know how to deal with while you were trying to survive it. Your strength and capacity allowed you to survive it, but it had to go somewhere, and it went inside your body. Now that you're safer, your body's wanting to tell you more about it, and we've got to find a way to let it and to help you through this. And this is part of why I think, to have centuries where we didn't take care of women and children like we needed to, just costs on every front and keeps costing epigenetically. I mean, we now know that trauma can go into our DNA, right? It can be epigenetic. You may not have had that particular trauma, but someone in your line did, and you're feeling it. Yeah. We also see this even more when we are doing psychedelics with people, and then we hear them get information from ancestors, and they're like, oh, this is making sense now.
Yeah. And you going back to that brief overview that you gave on the roots of patriarchy, what was coming to my head as you were describing that is also that male-dominated hierarchical model of medicine that is evolving alongside that, which is causing us to be more disconnected from the wisdom in our bodies, not trusting the messages we're getting from our bodies because we were taught that you don't know anything. Your doctor is up on this pedestal next to God.
Sure.
And it's just leaving people in this place where they're lost, probably have experienced all sorts of trauma, don't know what to do with it, don't know what it's doing to their physical body. It's such a multi-layered crisis.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you just think about it through a medical model lens, what is anecdotal data? And how is that or is that not valued? Empirical data, right? In other words, if you notice it in 40 patients, it doesn't matter if it hasn't been studied in that way. That information that you've been getting through these relationships doesn't matter. That's anecdotal. We don't think of anecdotal. But we don't talk about the fact that I'm going to teach medicine as if people are only bodies. And I'm going to teach psychology as if people are only emotions, right? Or only emotions in families. And I'm going to pretend this is true in the US for sure. And I don't know if it is in Canada and in the UK, but my hunch is that it is, that we are going to pretend that there is not a genital part of you, a pelvic part of you, a heart-centered body pleasure part of you. Now that's integrated. All our other ologies, biology, the study of what biological, if you go through all the ologies, what is sexology? It is biopsychosocial, spiritual, sexual. It's the only ology I know of that isn't a thing, right? So we don't even teach it. We wouldn't know how to teach it in our model because we can't silo it, right? We have to teach it in an interdisciplinary way. So we ignore it. And then we ignore spirituality as if that doesn't have an impact on all the other systems, right? Yeah. And so we stay being this kind of ignorant. I worked in medicine for a really long time, and I have so much compassion for the way physicians are taught to do what they do. In other words, they are told you're 100% responsible for cure. And if you don't cure, you're an incompetent physician. But how much of what we treat now in chronic illnesses has an absolute cure that's clear, right?
Very little.
We stop that in wounds and infections, which is all what we do in the ER. Really, that's what the ER is. But every other place of medicine, we ought to be doing it biopsychosocially, spiritually, and sexually. We ought to be able to spend 45 minutes or an hour the first go around and get a really full assessment of people's lives and situations and histories and what's going on in their bodies, so that we have that information to then work with what they're asking of us. And we have to be able to say, I wish I had more for you, but at this moment in time, we are limited in this way, and I don't have more than that. And that's the reality, in like that physician or that nurse practitioner might have. But let's maybe put together a team of multiple different kinds of healers, and maybe we can get some stab at this.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense, and yet we keep doing it. A method makes no sense, but it's not serving what we're being asked to treat.
It's amazing I'm just echoing in my head what you said about sexual health and sexuality, and how that really is something that touches on everything, but is just swept conveniently under the rug because nobody wants to talk about it, because it brings up feelings of embarrassment and shame and everything else. And yeah, that's so interesting. And for you to be able to see that anecdotal data when you were working with these practitioners, over and over and over again, and go, wait a second, obviously, like, this is a theme here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the gifts was that I'm over here teaching family therapists, people who are going to work with individuals and relationships, right? So they think systemically. I'm over here sort of in that world. And then I'm over in medicine, and I'm just meeting really lovely people, but also coming to appreciate that double bind they got put in. And then I would go back and be teaching the therapist, and I'd be like, do you guys realize that you're expected to call a supervisor or an older clinician when you hit a novel situation you don't know what to do, and get and consult on that case? That's called ethics in psychotherapy. Do you know that physicians are not encouraged to do that? They're expected to know. There's no place for it even. And so they are so alone and so like facing this sense of incompetence all the time. And nobody's there to talk them through why they're not crazy. The system is, right? The system's not working. And I would just, I would just feel for them. I have a daughter that has decided to go into medicine, and I tried to talk her out of it. I'm like, honey, I want to talk about how it's going to affect your heart, mind, and your body, this kind of life, work life, But yeah, I think when you're in it, and you guys may have seen this too, you can see that all of those systems are involved in the human experience, right? And humans who walk through your door, they don't leave part of themselves out. They're coming in and they actually think you're trained in this stuff, and we're often not, right? Yeah, I feel like we have to be honest about that a little bit. I talked a lot in the book about sexual shame and the impact that I had seen in people's lives over and over and over again. It took me 11 years to write that book, because by the time it was published, I had been working in this area for like over 15 years. I had a PhD student approach me, and she said, I know your work, and I really wanted to do some research on religious sexual shame and its impact. I'm like, great. She goes, well, I got into the literature, but you have to build it on literature there is. Just there is no operational definition for sexual shame anywhere in the literature. This is 2015 maybe. And I said, well, you have to do that then. I was saying the obvious. She already knew that, but I'm like, but I for one will be so grateful. And I know there are people around the country that'll be very grateful that you established that so that they can build on it. And I remember I was flying home from some talking thing that I did somewhere in the country, and I was reading her dissertation because I was on her committee. I saw the definition that emerged from her research and from her interviews. She interviewed an open demographic in the U.S., mostly women. I don't remember if there were men in there or not, but reading it, the definition like lifts off the page. And I was stunned because in that, it had been put in black and white, what I had been seeing in people's lives for years. But having that definition meant that when I said, I don't know how we could hurt people more than hurting them in their sexuality, in their developing sexuality, because it's all coming from a place of delight and curiosity, right? When a kid finds their genitals, it's the best day of their life. They need somebody there that's going, yeah, That's a this, like we're just labeling things. That's what we're doing at this age, whatever. But they don't. They get somebody freaked out and scared and sometimes loud or hits their hand away or whatever. That's pre-verbal. And that does not stop. The child is going to keep doing that. They're going to remember there's a lovely place on their body until they're about 3 or 4. And then they're going to start to put together, oh, I'm supposed to go to my room or I'm supposed to go into the bathroom. Those places I can have privacy. And it takes them a bit cognitively to get that, to learn that cue. And so they're getting shamed how often? And told basically that your impulses, there's something profoundly wrong with you, which is just shame. Well, when you see how that then manifests in the adult that feels humiliation and disgust towards their body, this has been going on pre-verbally. This is in the central nervous system. This is a type of trauma. We have taken their beautifully natural, evolving, developing sexuality, which develops with their relationality, which develops with their emotionality. And we have made those parts of them bad. And then we wonder why they can't give love and receive love. Because they started putting a mask on because they knew they weren't good enough. By 6, we have 50% of 6-year-old girls modifying their diets already. 2/3 of 9-year-olds, 90% of 15-year-olds. Plain research, because they've already learned they're not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Scary.
So when Nicole did that research, Dr. Noelle Clark, I just love sharing that around. And it came out, she defended a month after the book came out. So in the audio version of the book, I put it in there. So I did that after the fact. And but it really shows the impact. And we're hitting people at their place where they do deep interpersonal connection, where they feel safe and seen, known, loved, and accepted. This is what a human drive of ours. We're hitting and hurting them there. Well, the Harvard 85-year study on happiness, if you know anything about that, shows that what actually helps people feel happy and joyful about their lives is the strength and safety of their relationships, their close relationships. This is exactly where we hurt people. So we make it difficult to do things. So we want to talk about divorce. We set you up for this to not be able to do a relationship easily or well, or to understand the role that you're playing. Like, we cannot blame people. We're doing all, I obviously have my critiques about the culture that I'm in, but we are doing this in such a way that we're hurting people in the most tender parts of them, where when they look back on their life, we will have hurt them the most.
And it's not like they can escape. They're stuck in that situation. Mm-hmm. How can we start to explore pleasure without guilt, especially for those who grew up in environments where sexuality was a taboo?
I love that question. I'm often saying, if you get the Shameless book, read it. The chapters are 3 or 4 pages. Start with birth to 2. Read that. Order the books from the library. Read them to your 2-year-old inside of you. And notice as you're reading where there's a part of you that goes, oh, I wish I had heard that. This feels so comforting to this young part of me. Feel into what your gut is saying, what your central nervous system is saying. Then go to the next one, 2 to 4. Get those books. Keep a journal. There's even a place inside the book at the end of each chapter to just write down your musings. So what became an aha for you? What became a grief for you, right? As you were doing this, like, oh, I felt so much grief about not getting that, because if I had, it would have made these differences, whatever your comments are. And just slowly and gently and lovingly walk yourself through your development, and you will feel yourself getting healed. Like, you will feel it. And it doesn't mean that your reactions or your triggers go away, but your awareness opens. And then when you have the next trigger, you've got something there to be like, oh, sweetie, that was just you didn't get that thing, but you are wired for connection and pleasure. as a human. It's the most human thing about you. So you're going to have to learn to have some experiences and just breathe yourself through it and go slow and do the neurobiological shifting that needs to happen in your brain. It's a process, but that's the most thorough, I think, and effective way to at least go do your first run through as far as healing some of that and becoming aware of those places that are hurt inside of you.
I love that as a self-exploration tool, because I'm just thinking here, a lot of the times when I work with clients who have chronic illness, we talk about a timeline. We go back and look at different parts of their lives and the stressful things that have happened and how they correspond to physical symptoms. But I feel that like sexual trauma and sexual shame is such a tender place that most people keep that locked away so tight that even if you're inviting them to share about the timeline of their life, the majority might not even touch on that. They might not even feel able to go there.
Yeah.
So I love that, that the book that you wrote walks people through that on a personal level, something they can do for themselves.
And it gives them that language that they don't have, right? It's like they have a lot of feeling, maybe, but they don't have the language. And so what that does is gives you the language and the knowledge. So now you can say things like, well, I just read this thing and I realized this about me. You get the language to be able to communicate. I have a urogynecology friend, and she says, I can ask about pelvic pain 5 or 6 times before I hear the story, because there's been so much that has made talking about that unsafe for them, even if they have a hunch about, well, yeah, I do sometimes have pain, like that's there. They just don't even know that they could do it, or do they know that it's safe enough to? Because at least in America, we are so behind in our research on women's health that women have been told it's in their heads for generations and are still being told that, and yeah, I mean, I was just talking to a clinician the other day, and she was like, these clinicians, they're still reporting data that has been refuted. The doctors are still upholding, no, we can't do HRT, or we can't do whatever, and the data was been refuted. Like, we have new data, it's really our fault. So even I think it's a multiple layered thing as to help people get to the point where they can say, well, I think I feel, or whatever, where they get a little bit out about what's really going on for them.
Yeah. Because surely there are people out there who are trying to change that trajectory with their children.
Yeah. So
what are the most common mistakes parents make when it comes to teaching children about the relationships and their body and consent and things like that?
First, it's not having the information themselves, which is kind of why sort of going through something like Shameless Parenting will help with that. They don't have it. And so another thing that lots of parents do is they tend to think, once their kids are in school from like 5 on or whatever, they tend to think that they're just so young, and they don't recognize what they're getting exposed to at school. And then kids start telling less and less about what's happening at school. So you're not able to act as a resource by getting ahead of things for them, which is why that book can be really helpful, because I'm like, average kid is exposed to pornography at 9 years old. Have you already been talking about it at 8? And then how do you talk about it at 8, right? Like this, they need this stuff so that kids can learn, oh, I can talk to my parents about that. Because they're open, they're aware. If they don't know something, I know that they don't go, right? And they don't yell. They go, oh, neutral face, happy face. Oh, what a fascinating question. I am so glad you brought that up. Thank you for trusting me with that question. That's a hard one. I think I need to go do a little bit of reading. Do you mind if I do that and we talk about this tomorrow? Right? That's response one. Was a kid that's in school that brings something just to buy yourself a little time.
Yeah, you don't have to have all of the answers. And I think most parents think that they do. Like in a situation like that, they're kind of like a deer in headlights, but it's like, well, I got to say something because I'm the parent, I'm the authority, I'm supposed to know things.
But we need to give ourselves so much more grace, right? We're learning how to parent is a combination of doing what feels natural, which is what happened for us, which may or may not be our best guess, but that's our default. That's what got programmed in us, right? And places where we have an awareness that we want to change the legacy. And that's just really hard work because we're not doing what feels natural. We're doing something else, which takes a lot of energy and it feels uncomfortable, right? So parenting is figuring that. I mean, that's where we often are, is in that somewhere.
And do you think that a part of this, a piece of the puzzle, is that parents don't show each other a level of affection and love and express that in front of children?
I got you.
Like just kissing or giving each other a cuddle or saying words of affirmation. So that creates more of this kind of taboo because children aren't accustomed to this kind of behavior, even from their parents, yet alone from someone else, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. We have research to show that the factor that most supports children's learning in school is how little they're worrying about their parents. In other words, when kids live with parents that feel secure with themselves, secure with each other, are affectionate, right? Demonstrate care and love to each other, then the child's white noise is how much I'm worrying about things, it's turned way low because these people that sustain my life are fine. I get to be free to be a kiddo. As this goes up, as kids start worrying, because they're not touching or because they're fighting or because they're mean or because they give funny looks to each other or whatever, they don't necessarily understand what they're seeing, but it goes into their body, into their central nervous system, and it turns the volume up on that white noise. So when they're in class, they're not hearing as much. They're not thinking as much because this worry thing is going on. It's incredibly important. And one of the things I noticed as I was teaching grad students is I started to notice how when students would talk, because I would have like one of my roles was clinical supervision. So I would have a group of 6 for 6 months at a time and another group of 6 at different points of their learning. So we got to know each other really well. And I had so many grad students saying, I never, ever saw my parents' marriage. They came to games. They went to parent-teacher conference. I never saw them hug or touch or kiss ever. I heard that like an increasing amount the last decade or so of my teaching. And it's so like, oh, that's going to imprint on you. Right? Like, yeah. Anyway, it's an important thing to talk about. And it's an important thing that I talk about with couples or people that are having a family. What does your child see when they are observing? What are you modeling for them?
Yeah. I only said that because as you were talking, I just remember observing this kind of stuff when I was a kid. I used to think, why is so-and-so so happy? I'd go around their house and I'd notice that their parents are super affectionate or it's a really loving household. I would want to spend more time at those houses. It's something that's stuck with me throughout my life. So yeah, that's why I wanted to ask that question. But it totally makes sense. And these people are thriving now and they're in secure relationships or they're married. It just goes to show how important that first stage of life is when it comes to being around in an environment that is safe, nurturing and loving, and where sex is socially accepted.
Right, exactly. Yeah. When I did some research in the book about where sex positivity was in sort of ancient thought. And there was this old Jewish idea that when the temple was destroyed, that Holy of Holies became the bedroom of the house of the parents. And that often on the Sabbath, the parents would go take a nap because it was a double blessing to make love on the Sabbath. And so I would hear these. So then I started to ask Jewish students of mine, did you grow up? Tell me what it was like. They'd be like, oh yeah, yeah, we always knew they were in there doing their thing, whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like, it was a normal part of life. Like, and they're off playing, like they're doing, and that does give a sense of security. Like, if I grow up and grow on, they're going to be fine, right? They're going to be good. And that gives a sense of security. But what you're saying, Katie, I couldn't emphasize it more. When I look at cultures that look at wealth as being more important than families and children, you will see the results of that. And you can see it all over our country. You know, we don't have, like, versus like Iceland or some of the Scandinavian countries, you have comprehensive sex education. You have healthcare, that is a right. You have education as a right, and you have childcare as a right. Right. So in Iceland, anybody who says, I want to be a parent, they will be supported by the government to become a parent, single or partner, doesn't matter. When you will have somebody available to support you in the year 1, birth to 12 months. At 12 months, there is a very special kind of childcare for the little ones. And then when they hit 3, there's preschool. So there's support for the family unit to have the resources that they need so that they're not worrying and doing 12 things out here. They're attending to the development of their child. It makes it more fun for everybody. And relationships are more secure. And you end up having way more secure people whose default relationally is one of security. So when they go to build a relationship, they're looking for somebody that they can be secure with, that they can feel good with, that can see, know, love, and accept them, right? Mutually. We blow right by that. And we're seeing the outcome of that, unfortunately. It's tragic.
Yeah. And I feel like that whole construct is just breaking completely, especially over here, because childcare is so expensive. People have to get jobs just to put their child in nursery. And they're so financially stressed, that is then transferring into their kids, and the whole thing is just completely broken. And it's progressively getting worse and worse and worse. And now what we're seeing is that people just don't want kids.
That's right. We've got the same thing.
Yeah, so many people, and they just don't want kids.
I think we're in a place where people are 2 to 3 jobs to support a family, and which means then you're at childcare for $2,500 a month or whatever. I mean, it's a mortgage basically, and then their healthcare. I mean, it's breaking people, and they're just so like, I have kids that are in their 30s, and so many of their friends are not going that route, not having kids.
Yeah, it's huge, because when it comes to intentional intimacy in long-term relationships, nurturing is so important, especially when dealing with stress and trauma, which links with chronic health challenges. How can people who are in a chronic health condition break free from that situation if they don't have the tools to know where to start? So instead of influencing their children, how are they supposed to influence themselves before putting their energy into influencing their own children?
That's a complex situation to be in when you've got these financial stresses that are on communities, people, and then you have somebody who also is dealing with a health crisis of a type or a chronic illness that they're having to learn to deal with, which is it's increasing their investment in themselves, or what they're needing to care for themselves, or requiring that. but it's limiting their ability to be connected to out here. Like they might not have the energy. They might have to sleep more. They might have to, just whatever the thing is. So I would often say to people as just a place, like, can we talk about what it might look like to imagine that this illness is like an unwelcomed relative that wants to move in and you want that relative to be a part of things, but you don't want it to overtake everything. Like, how can we make a place for the illness where we can talk with it and listen and care for it? But we also say, in essence, and you don't get to come into these areas of my life as much as I can. I'm going to try to keep those areas with as much joy or as much, sort of what brings me hope or whatever. I'm going to try to keep it luxurious. Might be, friendships, or might be, having lunch once a week with somebody or whatever. But the things that you want to try to draw a bit of a boundary. I know it's not perfect and you can't, there's no such thing as that, but a bit of separation so that you don't become your chronic illness. It is something that you deal with, but it is not you. You are so much more than that. So how do we try to create some boundary as well as increase places of joy and happiness and satisfaction and curiosity and, connection, all that. And try to design something where we use their friendship system better so they have more of a village and more support, and where we're really clear on what does seem to make a difference and we're doing more of that. I don't know if that's exactly what the question you're asking, but that's kind of how I think about.
I wanted to follow up with saying, have you seen positive results, or have you worked with clients in this realm who have gone on to try a psychedelic protocol and they've had great results to help them work through this trauma, to then understand it better so that they can actually put their energy into their own children?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I see in the psychedelic space and here as people are talking about their experiences in that space too, or walking with clients in that space, is the psychedelic experience quite often is very somatic in the body. It's a experience, like mind, body, soul experience. And in that way, it can get to things that were purely somatic before. So for example, I was working with somebody and they had a pretty traumatic childhood, and their somatic experience was from the minute they opened up their eyes until they closed them at night. They felt a kind of hypervigilance that was life-taking. So they were doing important work in the world that felt really like what they wanted to do. They worked in oncology, like they did some really important things and they loved it. But their inner sense, their somatic sense of themselves all day long, every day, was this like hypervigilance, almost like just shaking and tense and highly anxious. And she was like, I don't think I can live my life like this. I think I will get to a point where I don't want to do this anymore. Even though there's all these things I want to do and keep doing. And she had done ketamine and it hadn't really touched it. She'd done therapy up the yin yang, all these things. And I said, well, let's give this a try and let's see. And it was so fascinating because her particular experience, and again, it's different even from time to time with the same person, and it's different across people. And this is where ideas inside the field are like, you have an inner healer. Inner healer is going to work with the psychedelic medicine to begin the process of healing you. And that is going to be particular to you. And for this person, it's like her whole body got calm. And she took a pretty fair amount and it just got calm. And she was just like, I don't feel a lot, but I don't feel that anxiety. I don't feel that hypervigilance. And she'd just shake her head. I mean, this went on for like 5 hours, And at the end of it all, we were doing integration over the next day and then once a week for a couple of weeks. It was like her body got set free. So now she had the energy to put in these places she'd been wanting to put it, but just that it was such a burden to feel this hypervigilance. And so she's like, over the next like month, she was like putting things into action because she could. Wow. So that's one of the powerful things about psychedelics, is that I think quite often it's a somatic experience that changes your central nervous system to a degree that it'll move you along your process a little faster than just talk therapy or things like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've done 4 or 5 sessions, and for the first 3, I was in a really terrible abusive relationship. And the way that my body reacted was that it didn't. Nothing happened. I literally was out for 5 hours, but I kid you not, it was literally like I just went to sleep. I just went to sleep and then I woke up and I was like, why am I not seeing these crazy visions and having all this trauma appear and work through it and seeing these kaleidoscopes? Like, I'm not having any visuals. It is just black. Mm-hmm. Nothing is happening. Yeah. And I spent some time reflecting on it, and I thought, was my body literally just shutting down because it was in a state of fear, and it needed to just, I still haven't worked it out completely, but I really didn't have this experience that was life-changing that loads of other people have. So I didn't know what your take on that would be.
Well, so every time it's been that way so far?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the last time I was in a TP, but that was it. It must have lasted only a few seconds. I cried a lot, but I didn't see anything. I was just crying pretty much for like the whole 5-6 hours, sobbing. Well, obviously I didn't know that I was sobbing. The people around me were like toilet rolls, I was crying big time. Don't overly remember that, but no visuals, again, just completely black.
I can tell you that isn't entirely uncommon.
Okay.
So that tends to be more often than not my response to psilocybin.
Interesting.
Personal. Yeah. I've been in groups of 25 people and I'm the only one that has that experience. Yeah. But I've talked to other facilitators and they're like, yo, no, that happens for some people. And it might be just that medicine for you. It also might be just those strains that you've tried. And I actually had a time where I did MDMA followed by a mushroom called Shakti.
Okay.
And that experience, I just felt profoundly held. Like just held. Not visuals, but it also wasn't. Sometimes I can feel like I've got ants in my skin, but I'm not getting anything else. That's not fun, So I don't know. I can just say, you're not weird. It could be a different strain will work different.
Yeah.
It could be that over time, you just like that particular medicine just has a different response inside my body. That's okay.
Yeah.
Totally fine.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to us getting to a point where we've got more options, legal options that people can try, because my thought is let's just figure out what's going to work best for people and let's help them along the way, because we're all going to benefit as people get healed, right? They're going to benefit, but the whole community benefits. Why wouldn't we be putting, whatever. I won't get on that soapbox, but we've got enough resources. We could have people that were actually focused on healing people.
Yeah.
And paying for it.
Yeah, exactly. That is a big rabbit hole to go down, for sure.
I think especially with women, like working with women, what you said about that one person that you worked with in psychedelics, being in that constant state of hypervigilance. I've also noticed this in speaking to clients, because my clients are women, tying this back to the pleasure piece and the sexuality piece. So many women that I talk to don't really enjoy sex because they are so in their head, because they are the whole time judging their body, and they can't they're so disconnected from their body. They're not even able to experience pleasure because the entire time they're just stuck in their head and they're worrying about their cellulite and they're worrying about that 5 pounds that they want to get rid of. And I think that it's such an interesting thing. And, you know, we could take this back to the whole patriarchy argument. But I think a big place of a woman's power is in her sexual energy. And I think so many don't realize that.
No, it's another place that would keep a woman down. I think patriarchy as a system is afraid of women owning their sexual power. There was a recent piece of research done, was just defended like 2 years ago, or maybe even, about 2 years ago. The researcher was working with middle-aged women who tested and described themselves as competent in their lives. She took this group of women, she gave them a couple of different measures, and then she gave them, I think it was like a 2 or 3, like 9 hours of training around patriarchy and sexual health and owning your power and what that means and what that looks like and blah, blah, blah. Like just a whole bunch of stuff on that. And then retested. And what she found was that women who feel empowered in their life do not necessarily feel empowered in their sexual power, in their sexual sort of, empowerment, basically, their ability to stand up relationally. So they were many of them were giving away power in their relationships. They would have it over here and then they would give it away. But when she started teaching this, the sexual empowerment and the patriarchy and the systems of oppression that are around women and what it means to stand up for yourself and speak for yourself and hold your own space, what she found was that kind of empowerment, when that grew, that strengthened every other kind of empowerment. So it worked that direction, where it didn't work in the direction of empowerment out here at work or whatever, actually translating in there. And I thought that was a really important piece of research, because again, if we started here, like there was one piece of research, this is what I think part of it would look like to start there, where you're raising girls to know where they begin and end, to speak for themselves, to know what their own pleasure is, passion is, etc. And then who deserves to be in their inner circle? What are the qualities of the people that they want close to them? How do they discern that? How do they protect themselves, keep people close that are safe, who will support their growth and wellness and whatever? And there was a study in Sweden, and they took 13-year-old girls and did kind of like a double-blind study. And for part of them, they gave them actual instructions on masturbation and their own pleasure and why their pleasure was important and was a power of theirs. And those girls, in Sweden, they tend to marry later. They tend to have, if they get married, they're going to get married before they have children, but not before they live, together, whatever. That's all part of, and they've had comprehensive sex education, right? So this is what we're starting with. But those particular girls were more discerning in their relationships than even their peers. Like they owned themselves in a way because somebody said, this is important and you can do this. And if you decide to be with somebody, they need to care about your pleasure because your pleasure is your power. It is healing for you. It is important that you live there. You know what? And so these girls owned it, and then they owned it through their adolescence and into their 20s, and it changed things a bit for them.
I can only imagine the uproar that would happen in the US or in Canada if something like that were to be even spoken about.
This was probably at least 15, maybe 20 years ago when I was teaching sexuality in the grad school. Somebody said, hey, did you know that so-and-so well-known sex therapist was interviewed about sexual health in children on Oprah? And I said, no, I don't know anything about it. So they sent me a link And I watched this show where Oprah's talking to her about why sex education is important and blah, blah, blah. And then the therapist shows a video that she has recorded of her with a mom and her 10-year-old daughter. And it's the most delightful thing because this 10-year-old is like perfectly precocious, like the kind of 10-year-olds I really like to see, it just, and she's like, I'm really glad I'm here because my mom has a really hard time talking about this stuff, but I deserve to know. I want to know what's up with my body and how does it work? And so would you help my mom talk to me? Like this is the way, it's so cute. And so literally she supports the mom and she gives her some diagrams, and where she kind of needs a little help, the therapist would come in and give her a little bit more. Part of it was, the anatomy, right? The whole anatomy of the vulva, which included the clitoris. And so the mom said something, kind of awkward about it. And the therapist comes in and she goes, yeah, it's a place inside your body that has an incredible amount of nerve endings, and it feels really good to touch. It's an important part of you. And boys have their own. It's a little bit different. And they had that diagram too. That's all it was. Right? Oprah got more negative response for that than anything I think she's ever done.
Wow. Not surprised.
I was so heartbroken about it because it was so clearly bonding for this mother and daughter, so clearly relieving to this young girl to know this is her body, it's a great body, and how she can kind of take care of it and enjoy it and that kind of thing. And I thought, I'm not going to see the changes I want to see before I die. I'll do it in my little world and with my kids and grandkids. I come from a lineage where you can see the difference. Lower STI rates, lower teen pregnancy rates, lower abortion rates because you're not getting pregnant. Right? You understand how it all works. You also understand that you deserve an egalitarian relationship. And so you learn to be discerning, and it makes for a different society, even though they have their own struggles, and all of the countries do have their own struggles, but there's more stability in those countries interpersonally, in communities and in homes, and which means schools and community centers and whatever, churches.
Yeah, because when you're empowering the minority who has been disempowered for so long, it just leads to more equitable relationships all around, which
Right.
in my mind would mean more happiness and fulfillment and better family systems. And,
Yes.
And then that's got a ripple effect down the line.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's really pretty stunning, the changes, the contrast between the two. There's a really good book called Not Under My Roof by Amy Shallett. And she grew up in Holland, where they have probably the leading comprehensive sex education. I have the curriculum. It's incredible. She grew up there, came to the US, did some studying, did grad work, and she started to notice that the way adolescents were with their parents around sex here in the US was completely different. Like where she came from, which is very similar to the stories in my family, you talked to your parents when you felt like you were getting close to somebody and that you might want to be sexual with. Like you talk to your parents about your own sense of your own readiness. And they engage because they've been engaging you at every step along the way, and they've been safe and trustworthy. And so kids love it. Kids are having sex for the first time at home, not in the back of a car or whatever, right? And being cared for and caring for is part of it because it's emotional education and relational education and sexual education. That's what family life education is. It's not just parts, right? She came here and it was so different. And so she did a qualitative study where she interviewed families in 2 different cities in Holland and families in 2 different cities who had adolescents in 2 different cities in the US. And then she wrote this book. I mean, she wrote the study and then she put it into a book. And it's really telling, I think, for people in the US who have epigenetics of silence and shame to read how these families operate and notice what happens inside of you. Like, I can't even imagine having ever talked to my parents that way. Or I can't even imagine my kids talking to me that way. I wish they would. Like, or, oh, wouldn't that be weird or awkward if my kid did that? No. We talk about health and wellness. We talk about brushing your teeth and taking care of your body. We talk about all kinds of things, and we give you age appropriate information every step of the way. And then we don't do anything here around bodies, desires, exploitation, support and mutuality, how to have voice, how to stand up for someone, how to ask for help, what consent is and what it is not. Like, this is what you need to do relationships well, how to do conflict, all that. And which is at the heart of people's happiness. And we choose to switch the metaphor here to say, yeah, you're going to drive a car someday, but you're not going to we're not telling you anything about it at all. And it's dangerous. And it's fun when you're old enough, but you're not old enough, so nothing. And then when they're 16, we hand them keys and tell them they're ready to go drive on the freeway. And driving is a much less important thing than how we're going to do our relationships, who we're going to let close to us, how we value or don't our bodies and what that's about. And I mean, we have to talk about media literacy. Like, I was watching a dance show with my two granddaughters who are 8 and 5. And cable TV now had commercials, unless you up your subscription, right? And so we were watching something, and a commercial came on, and I thought, oh, I didn't know commercials were back, And then I thought to myself, how do I turn this into a teaching moment? So then I said to the girls, I said, do you know what that is? And they're like, it's like an ad, or I mean, because they don't have a TV, so they watch a little this and a little that. So I said, well, it's called a commercial or an advertisement, and the money that is generated from that country puts money into the pockets of the people that own this channel of stuff. And so let's play a game that when something comes up and a commercial comes up and we have to wait 10 seconds or whatever, if we can guess what they're trying to sell us. Okay. And so, one comes on for a medication. They're like, I don't understand. And I said, I think they're trying to tell us we should go buy that medication instead of let the doctor tell us if that's important to us. What do you think? And they're like, yeah, I think so, So we turned it because that's media literacy. Like, part of my job with them, their parents' job, is to be able to help them distinguish that some things are selling to some people and not others, benefit some people and not others, who's included and who's not, to develop literacy around what's coming at us 300 times a day or whatever it is. It's just coming at us all the time. I want them to think, because if they don't, they'll get swept up in it, and they'll think they're not good enough until they have that. And man, I'm going to fight that to my last breath.
That makes me think of a conversation I had with my daughter the other day. I have a 17-year-old who is going to school to study psychology, and she's very fascinated by the brain and human behavior. And she brought up to me the other day this influencer culture. She told me, Mom, there's like groups of OnlyFans stars who are getting together and buying houses together and living as roommates. And then they have their like social media channels where they, show these teenage girls their Ferraris that they bought with the money that they made doing OnlyFans. And it's becoming this whole like subculture around using your body and your sexuality to make this ridiculous income. And her question was like, what is that doing to this young generation of females? So I'll pose that question to you and get your take on like where we're heading with, because in some ways we're still very archaic, like you said, when it comes to sexual empowerment. And then in other ways, we've gone so far in the other direction that it's like, where are we going to end up?
Well, I think I would first challenge, is that another direction or is it just women doing it? Is that different than I'm going to make $1 billion modifying AI so that we don't need web designers anymore, or we don't need this or that anymore. We don't need people writing original pieces of literature. It all can be done by a bot, and that's going to make me billions of dollars. Is that different? I don't know. I mean, I just really don't know. I mean, I think it's a lovely question she posed. It would be a fascinating and fun conversation to have. And I would be like, wow, what do you think? What do you think 10 years of, I'm going to make money this way. It's safe. I get to decide what I do, what I don't do. Basically, I'm not being exploited. I'm doing it. I'm deciding for myself. This has consent involved. I'm an adult. I can do this. Or maybe they're not adults. I don't know. But if they're not, then we talk about that. What do you think if this was what I did my sophomore year, my junior year, my senior year, how would that be different? How might that affect my life so that when my own kids were doing those grades, I have this experience? How do you think it would affect it? One, positive, negative, what? How does having lots and lots of money affect somebody's life? What makes a person valuable and important? Is it money? Because we got a lot of people who think it is. But what does it buy you? And what doesn't it buy you?
And what's the trade-off?
Is there a trade-off? And if there is, what is it? And how are we with that particular trade-off? Is that fine for now? But would that be fine 10 years from now or 20 years from now? I don't know. I mean, these are just walking ourselves through these scenarios is a good exercise in discernment, right? Looking at it from right here might not be good enough. How's this going? Like, yeah, I'll have a Ferrari, and great. In 10 years, that Ferrari is going to have 100,000 miles on it. I don't know. What do things provide us? I mean, when you're talking to a 17-year-old, I love to ask questions more than make statements, but I'll make a statement here and say, I think that money gets you comfortable and gives you opportunity to try new things, but it does not buy you love or safety or trusting relationships. It makes you comfortable. That has value. But we know from research that once people have enough, which means enough food, enough shelter, enough safety and security, any more doesn't get you much more as far as your contentment goes. Yeah. I think these are really important conversations. Yay for you and yay for your daughter for bringing it up and asking the question. She's going to be confronted with issues we've never seen in quite this way. AI, 10 years from now, we might live in a very different, and it's our kids that are going to be helping us through it. So we've got to help them learn to think. That's our job. Coming up with it's helping them I don't know. What do you think? What do your friends think? I think it's important we're not blind. I think it's been important for us to not be blind as far as our thinking goes all along human development. We haven't been the wisest creatures. I mean, after colonization, we just keep colonizing. We don't live in reciprocity with the land. We don't think how the land is constantly providing for us. We're not grateful for that anymore. We just extract, take, and we think we deserve it and it makes us more valuable. But does it, I love that you guys are having these conversations with kiddos as they're growing up.
Yeah, I love that she feels comfortable enough with me to have these conversations. And that's healing for me because that's something that I never got in my relationships when I was her age. So every time that she comes to me, I remember back when she was initially starting into puberty, her stepmom bought her a book on what's happening to my body. And I'm so glad she did because, I never had those conversations. So I didn't feel comfortable starting those conversations. And I remember she came to me and was like, Mom, did you know I'm in stage 2 of
And stage 2.
She's like, I know because my breasts are getting larger and they're, feeling a certain way. And she's walking me through all of the reasons why she knows she's in stage 2 of puberty. And I'm like, that's great. I was kind of flabbergasted in the moment.
Yeah, of course.
Back, but I love it because it just gives me that reflection, like, 16-year-old me would have loved to be able to have these conversations.
Absolutely. And your response was priceless. Like, even though you felt that, I don't know, you did that. Like, I'm always like, if you can get this part of you to just be neutral or happy, it's going to feel safe to them. Even if your insides are going, oh my Lord, if your outside can be like, wow, okay, tell me more. They're going to keep wanting to connect with you because you're safe. You're safe, and you're one of the most important people in their lives, And if we're not safe, they're going to go elsewhere because why put themselves through that? I'm going to get yelled at, or my mom's not going to know what to do, or I'm going to make her feel uncomfortable, or whatever, So, and I'm always saying to parents, you want to be a resource for your children. But this is what you need to do that. Like, you've got to make this, your face, look happy or neutral or grateful or something, no matter what they're saying to you. Like, wow, I really want to understand that more. Is there more you can tell me? Like, this is new for me. I didn't get to have these conversations with my mom, or whatever you say. But just be honest. Like, I am so glad you brought this to me, and I'm going to be a little awkward, but I just want you to know how grateful I am that you came to me, and I want to do this with you. I want to hear this, and I want to hear about this with you. Like, just be authentic and loving and not trying to hide your freak out.
Your household environment must be amazing. Yeah.
Oh, it's wild, let me tell you. Yeah, we would have conversations. My kids were your daughter's age, around the table, there'd be all kinds of things. And then my kids would say to me, because of the work that I did, I didn't always know where my lines were, so they would be like, well, no, you're stepping over the line. And I'd be like, oh, sorry, But they always brought their friends over, and they were their peer sex educators. Because they weren't getting raped at home, or you should come talk to my mom about that. She'd talk to you about that. Like, that was common. That was just common. And that was fun for all of us. The way we talk about it now, and now we have grandchildren, and it's a couple of weeks ago, I said to my son, oh, here, you need to have some books at home right now because the kids where they are, and the oldest is getting more things at school than you probably realize she is. And so I sent 4 books home with them, and they're like, thank you so much. And I'm like, yeah, you just want to keep talking to me. I want to be talking about that stuff. And the son's looking through one of the books, and he goes, oh, I remember this. I remember these pictures. I loved this book. I thought it was so great. And I'm like, yeah, just make it easy.
Generational books. Love that. It's been a pleasure. Is there anything else that you want to add? The work that you do, anything that you want to share?
I will say that if anybody who's been listening to this episode is really committed to doing their own healing work around shame and wants to work through either book or both books, and when they go to get them, it feels too expensive for them, like it feels out of their reach, I don't want anybody not doing the work with those books because it feels too expensive. And I make it available for people to DM me through Instagram. I am Dr. Tina Shameless. DM me and say, is it possible to get a promo code? Because I can send a promo code to an audio version of either of the books to somebody. The books are really practically helpful for people trying to deconstruct what they went through when they were growing up and really heal. And they want to travel with these 2 books or either book. I want to support that. If you can afford it, great. Yes, that's helpful to me too. But if you can't, I don't want you not to do it because of that. So I think that's just one thing I would leave is for sure my website, which has a bunch of free stuff, my website and my Instagram, and then for people to feel free to reach out. And I am happy to the degree that I can to support people's work and healing, because people deserve to understand that they are beloved miracles. Literally, no one has walked the face of the earth exactly like them ever before. And what we all need is your authenticity. We need you to be fully you and aware of how infinitely valuable you are, and then bring that more and more to fruition in your life, because that helps all of us. And so the degree to which I can support people in doing that, I really love to.
Beautiful.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, we'll put all the details in the show notes so people can reach out to you if they need to. Can people get your book on Amazon, or is it just through your website?
No, they can get it through Amazon. They can also take, and if, like many people I know are like, yeah, I'm not shopping with billionaires anymore. I'm not doing the Amazon thing. I'm not doing the Target thing. I'm not doing it. And you can take the title to a bookstore, a local bookstore, and ask them to order it for you. And they can do that. And yeah, but again, if having trouble, let me know. Yeah, and they're on Kindle too, and there's audio versions, both of them too. And I read both of them. So if you want to get it from me, and you do more listening than you do sitting and reading, which a lot of people do, feel free to get the audio version of it. And yeah, and I've had people contact me like, I've got a book group, we're doing this book, and we ever have a conversation with you? And I will, if I can, I will arrange that too.
Well, that's
have
amazing.
a conversation with the book group.
That's amazing. That's super cute. Literally just bombard you with questions.
I'm happy to come back.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad that you guys are out there daring this.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be amazing. Did you want to add anything, Amanda?
No, I just want to say thank you, Tina, for coming and sharing all of your wisdom with us. This has been really eye-opening for me because, like you said at the beginning, this is a topic that touches so many aspects of our lives and affects so many people, and just so many people are not feeling comfortable enough to go there, to dig deeper into these issues. You make it feel safe and accessible, and I imagine that feeling continues in your books. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing what you do.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a joy to be with both of you.
Yeah. If I ever have children, I will be getting the books.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I get to walk alongside you, then.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
For anyone listening who resonated with this episode, whether you're unpacking shame, navigating trauma, or simply learning to feel safe in your body, know that healing your relationship with yourself is the foundation for healing everything else.
You can connect with Dr. Tina at drtinashameless.com or follow her on Instagram at drtinashameless for more wisdom, resources, and updates on her upcoming retreats and trainings.